Okay, for this tutorial, we're going to work on understanding Python lists. Um, so as usual, I'm logged into the Unix server for the class, and I'm in my temp directory, and I'm going to start up a Python 3 interpreter so that I can start creating and working with some lists. The first thing is sort of how do you create a list? So the easiest way to create a list is to create it explicitly at one particular time. So if I wanted to create a list that had 3 numbers in it, I start with the open square bracket, and then I put the numbers that I want separated by commas. So I'm going to use 3.4, 7.8, and 11.2. So I create a list like that. It will create a list of 3 elements. The first one is 3.4, 7.2, and 11.2. And you can see that they're separated by commas. And these spaces don't have to be there. They're for sort of readability. That is a little bit harder to read, but it still works. So you can see because this is the interactive interpreter, it echoes the value of that list. If this were a script, it would not obviously echo the value of that list. It would just create it, and then it's not being captured in a variable, so it ceases to exist. So to create a list that I can then access later on, I have to store it in a variable. So now I've created the same list with it's a different list with the same values. But now I've captured it in a variable. So now I have that list. Okay, so once you have a list, there are lots of things that you can do with it. The first thing that you probably will think about doing is how do I access like a specific element of that list? And the easiest way to do that is to access it by index. A list is sort of a linear order of items. This is the first item, this is the second item, and this is the third item. And those items can be accessed by indexes. So the index of the first item is actually 0. The index of the second one is 1. And the index of the third one is 2. So indexes start at 0 and they increase linearly through the integers. So if I wanted to access the first element of this list, I would use the variable name, and I'm going to use square brackets to indicate which index I want. So I'm going to do the 0 index, and I get the first element. If I use index 1, I get the second element, and if I use index 2, I get the third element. Now, if I go past the end of the list, if I try to access index 3, which is the fourth element, and this list only has 3 elements, then I get the famous list index out of range error. So you'll want to you'll want to recognize these errors, these index errors, because they happen a lot. If you try to go off the end of a list, you'll get a list index error. Python also has a way to access elements of the list using reverse indexes. So if I want to get the last element of this list, I may not know how long it is, but I want to get the last one, I can call list, I can use the name of the variable and then use -1 to indicate the last element. And it gives me the last element. And I can count backwards using -2 to access the second to last element, -3 to access the third from last element. And again, if I try to go off this end of the list with -4, I get an index error, list index out of range. So you can use negative indices to count from the end of the list to the front, and you can use indices that start with 0 to go from the beginning of the list to the end. If you want to calculate the length of the list, there's a Python function called len, or length, and you just give it the name of the the variable that holds the list as an argument, and it'll tell you how many elements are in it. So there are 3 elements in it. So you can combine these things. For example, you might try to do list1 and ask for the index of element length list1. So here I'm going to ask for, I'm going to use the list1 variable, and I'm going to use this as my index. So my index is calling the length function with list1 as an argument. So I will get 3 back from doing this. And you'll notice that if I try to access this, this will give me an index error because there is no index 3 into a 3-element list. Even though the length of the list is 3, the indices are 0, 1, and 2. And so I get my index error out of my list index out of range. Okay, so that's essentially how to access elements of a list by index. Another kind of cool thing that you can do with lists is you can get what's called a slice of a list. So here's my list 1. So if I wanted to get just the 0 and 1, the 0 index and 1 index as a sublist, I could calculate list 1, and I want the 0 element and the 1 element, but not the 2 element. So I give it the index of the first element that I want, and 1 plus the index of the last element that I want. So it will return element 0. 1 is less than 2, so it'll give me element 1, but it won't give me element 2. So you can see how it gives me 3.4 and 7.8, but not this one. So if I wanted to get the entire list, I could do it this way. Obviously, if I try to give it an index out of range, it will actually won't give me an error if I'm taking a list slice. It'll just allow it to go off. So nuance of Python. I can also put length of list 1 here to get the 0 element through the length of the list, and that will work. And then I can alter the starting index as well to get bigger or smaller slices of the list. So those are sort of the 2 main ways that you're going to access list elements, either by index, well, I guess there's 3 ways, by index, by reverse index, or by taking a slice of the list if you need only a part of it. So the next thing that you might want to do is add something to the list. So that happens quite a bit. For example, I can create list 2 as an empty list. So the 2 square brackets with nothing in them indicate an empty list. So if I ask for list 2, it doesn't contain anything. Now I want to put something into that list, and the function that I use to do that is append. So I type the name of the variable and then a dot, like we do for class functions, and then the function is called append, and then I can append a value to this list. And it doesn't have to be a number. I can put a string, for example. And now if I ask for what list 2 is, it is a list with a single element called hello. And then if I want to add another item, I can add that using append. And now my list has 2 elements. List 2. And so now my list has 3 elements. Now I can add elements of different types to the same list. So I can call list2.append and now add a number. And my list 2 now has a string in the first place, a string in the second place, a string in the third place, and a number in the fourth place. So these are indices 0, 1, 2, and 3. So you can do that. You can have dissimilar types in the same list. That is generally considered a kind of a bad idea, because if you want to process this list using a loop or something like that, which we'll do next time, having different elements is going to make it really difficult to process these elements in a very efficient way. So typically, if you catch yourself trying to create a list that has different data types in it, you probably want a different data structure to hold that information that will make it easier to process. But you can do it. So that's essentially how you create a list and how you add items to a list, and then how you can access those items for your use. You can also remove items from a list in various ways, but that is pretty uncommon to want to delete elements from a list. So that's essentially what you need to know for lists for this course. So go ahead and practice that, and next time we'll work on processing list elements using loops.